My parents sided with my assaulter. As a kid, I was very limited with who I could be friends with, what shows or movies I could watch, what activities I could do, and so on. I was only allowed a handful of sleepovers. At 15, I was finally allowed to watch PG-13. I was only allowed to listen to the weird music my mom liked until 13 when I was allowed to branch out. I was raised to be a forever kid, almost forced into believing in Santa until 11. Every day before bed, we had to submit our devices to mom and dad for them to check through them and leave them on the counter overnight to see what we were up to. We sometimes snuck down at night to use them and put them back in the morning, but would often be caught because the next day they would see it was first used at X time. Fast forward a few years, 13 years old, and we moved provinces and I went to a new school. Things did not go well and my parents blamed me for not socializing enough. Literally on my first day, this girl walked up to me and told me she hated me and started a smear campaign. So 2 years later, I switched again and went to another school, 15 years old, in the same city. It was worse. Eventually, I managed to start talking to this guy in the grade above me, Harley Murdoch, and he seemed nice and funny and I figured that I had managed to find a friend. He was a bit odd at times, but I was lonely and hurt and didn't mind because I had a friend. 3 months into school and during lunch break, Harley Murdoch, and I took a walk around the schoolyard. There were walking paths in the woods, and he came up behind me, a hand on my throat holding me still as his other hand pulled up my shirt and he was touching my breasts. I asked him to stop and he pushed me to the ground, sat on my hips, holding my shirt up and holding me down with one hand while the other. He used to take a picture of me like that. I didn't know what to do and he said that I needed to do as he said, or that picture of me, he showed it and it has my face and breasts in it, would go around to all the guys at school. He was a semi-popular guy, and I was the new girl who didn't have any friends or contacts. I was already low on self-esteem going into this, so I truly felt like there weren't really any options, so I did what he asked. I still was begging him to let me stop, but he kept reminding me that he had that photo. He would finger me, make me give him oral. I'd be vomiting during it, and he wouldn't care. Touch my breasts and bum. This went on for a few weeks. I was constantly dreading going to school because I knew he would make me go out and do stuff during lunch and other breaks. During one class, a classmate must have noticed how miserable I was and asked me if something had happened, and I told her I didn't know how to explain what was wrong. She managed to get me to explain somehow, and the next day when I went to school, she followed me at lunch and witnessed it happen and recorded it on her phone. The day after that, when I went to homeroom, my teacher told me I was needed in the principal's office. I went in, and the receptionist brought me to the counselor where she explained to me that there was an officer waiting to speak to me. I never expected it to get to that point of help. I wasn't even sure if I was able to get help because he technically had consent. I agreed in order to stop him from sending it, and well, he didn't rape me. At least that's how I justified it in my mind in order to get by. The whole, it isn't as bad as it could be, other people have it worse story that people tell themselves. The counselor and I went into the conference room, and there was Constable Smith, the worst police officer British Columbia has ever seen. She sat me down and started questioning me, just getting the dates and actions done, and then said that my parents must be notified that she had spoken to me. She left and it was just the counselor and me, and she asked if I wanted to tell them when I got home, or if she should call. I knew I would have a hard time telling them, so I asked her to do so. Within 20 minutes, both my parents arrived and picked me up from school. They didn't say a word until I was home. Then the yelling started. They sat me on the floor in front of them and started yelling stuff like, "How could you do this to us? Don't you know how embarrassing that was? Having to come and pick up our daughter because she can't keep her legs closed? I was a 16-year-old virgin. Are you finally happy with yourself?" And so on. Eventually, they demanded I tell them what happened, and my dad's first response was, "You could have stopped him. Why didn't you bite his dick off?" And then my mom went on to say that I wasn't reacting like a SA victim should be acting. A few days later, we had to go to the station to give my statement. My parents were not happy with it. We got to the interview room with Constable Smith, and she went off on how all his friends gave statements against me, that the video just proves a sexual act has happened, but not that it was assault. I never even got to see it. Or that he would be tried as an adult and it could harm his future, that even the teacher said he and I were friendly, that he said that there was no photo on his phone, and so on. She was clearly pushing for me not to pursue this SA case. When we got home, my dad grabbed me by the neck, pushed me up against the wall and pushed up so I was barely on my feet, and shouted in my face that I was a cheap whore for letting that happen and that I got what I was looking for. They even went so far as to suggest that I switch to that school to meet him and then made up the SA for attention. They refused to allow me to charge him with SA because they said that they didn't want to be known as failures and it would damage the good family name. They were too embarrassed about having a daughter who was SA'd. They pulled me out of school and had me homeschool for the rest of that year. They took away my phone and had me on a very strict routine, and I wasn't allowed in my room except for sleeping or changing. They had me constantly doing work around the house while they argued in their room about what to do with me. Because my mood was so low, my mom brought me to the doctor and had me sit in the waiting room while she gave her side of the story and got me prescribed antidepressants and made me take them. Yes, I was depressed and at the time even cutting and considered offing myself because I was completely alone. I had been violated, the law betrayed me, and worst of all, my own parents betrayed me. They are the ones who are supposed to stand by you and protect you, yet mine took the side of my attacker. How can you forgive that? I took the antidepressants and sure, they stopped the lows, but they also stopped the highs. I never felt happy taking them. I felt what I could describe only as blah. Eventually, we went to counseling, which was again dictated by them. They sat on either side of me and told the counselor everything they thought was wrong with me. I felt I could never speak my mind because they were right there, so I just kind of sat there silently listening to what they really thought of me. My depression turned to eating, which turned to weight gain. This 165 centimeters girl eventually weighed over 100 kilograms. My parents reaming me out about how I need to get going and need to get after life, and how I can't just sit on my ass all day when that was all they would let me do. I wasn't allowed out, I wasn't in charge of meals, I didn't have access to technology, I wasn't allowed in my room. They trapped me inside the house all day, every day. What else was I supposed to do? Also during that time, my mom had me tested for PCOS because my aunt had it. The tests were inconclusive because of my age. They couldn't give a diagnosis, as a teenage girl typically has a few small ovarian follicles, but my mom told me I had it, and I only recently, 6 years after, got to read the report, which says they can't say. Every few months for years on end, she would say, "You're going to have such a hard time having kids," or "You're going to have a tough time getting pregnant. You know, just the one thing I want in life is to have a large family of my own," and she is constantly beating down on me that I won't ever be able to achieve it. For my final year of high school, 16 years old, I was allowed to attend in person. I was very unhappy with myself and was terrified of going back there in case anyone had anything to say about the essay, as he, Harley Murdoch, was arrested in class. The year went fine, but in a bit of a blur, and I graduated. It was a COVID grad, so we literally did nothing except get our diplomas and take individual formal photos, all for nothing. I was allowed to finally work a job that summer, but just a few weeks, and they tried to pressure me to quit because the shifts ended after the sunset. Luckily, I was allowed to keep it for 7 months. I started college instead of university because I had to upgrade some classes I didn't do well in following the essay, and decided that when I turned 18, just a few months after starting, I would set up an online dating account. So on my birthday I did so. The results within the first few days were good. There was a bunch of activity, female privilege, but very soon after my parents found it, they started monitoring the Wi-Fi activity at home, and I had my laptop taken away along with my phone. Again, they printed my college schedule and would drop me off and pick me up like a child, and I had to complete assignments from Dad's computer with him sitting behind me. I couldn't even buy lunch at school without them questioning it. They monitor my bank account from their phone, as they created it as a sub-account of theirs. During this time, I also quit the antidepressants. My mom was very upset with me, but I hated how I couldn't feel any emotion. During that summer break, starting in April, on my Steam Deck, I had an old Reddit account, and on our /Forever Alone dating, I managed to meet the most wonderful guy. He was very understanding about the situation of having to try and hide from my parents, the SA. He and I have the same taste in everything and so on. He and I decided to enter a relationship, and I made a Discord account on the Steam Deck to talk on instead of here. It's just easier, and everything was amazing. Also during that time, my mood had never been better. Over the summer and fall, I managed to lose 10 kilograms, mostly from just being happier, honestly. I felt good about myself and never felt the need to snack. He was someone I could vent to about everything my parents had done and are doing. Even if it's just a little disagreement during the day, I could tell him, and he was on my side. I had never had someone on my side before. I managed to switch to university along with getting my phone and computer back over the summer. I had been accepted to one university in my city that I didn't really like the program at, and I had been accepted to one that was 2 provinces away that I really liked the program at. My parents said I could choose which one I wanted, so I said I wanted the out-of-province university. They agreed, but said to continue on both sides, continue advancing the steps of both applications, choose my classes, etc. Then August came around, and they sat me on the floor in front of them and told me that they thought the in-town university would be better, and I would be getting the same degree, BSc, from either school, so I might as well stay home because this one was 3rd ranked in Canada. I was upset because they said it was my choice, and I knew that the program wasn't what I wanted. I felt that I needed to get away and spend time on my own, but they again wouldn't let me. It was also upsetting because my boyfriend and I had made plans for him to visit if I went to the out-of-province school, and I had to explain to him that they wouldn't let me go, so I had to stay in town and live at home under their control. I agreed with my parents, canceled the out-of-province application, and continued on to the in-town university. At university, whenever I had a break between classes, I would video call him with my phone, and I would message him all the time. Eventually, it turned 19 years old. Over that semester, we spoke more about sexual interests and found that we were completely aligned with those as well. By the end of that semester, he and I had said that we love each other, and we both truly meant it. Christmas break rolled around, and the day after my last final exam, my parents wanted to have a talk with me. They again sat me on the floor in front of them and started questioning me about my boyfriend, calling him disgusting names and talking down about his job. He actually makes above the average for his age, which is only a few months older than me. His lack of a degree, how he is going to kidnap you and drug you up and whore you out, and they were talking about how disgusting our nudes were and so on. This meant that they had been spying on us the entire time. They mentioned my ad on Reddit and stuff that we said throughout the entire time we were talking. They looked, saw our nudes, and kept looking at their daughter for 8 months. They kept justifying it and saying that I made them do it and that they were looking out for me and threatened to put me in a mental institution simply because I had a boyfriend. They said I was risking my safety and theirs because they claimed he could find my location simply by messaging him. My dad even said that my boyfriend was going to blackmail him with my... For the winter break, yet again no devices and hard labor. Luckily, I was still allowed to attend the second semester and I managed to get in contact with the most amazing counselor ever. She was the most helpful person I have ever met. She was appalled at what my parents had done and said that they were both severely narcissistic and had mentally, emotionally, and physically abused me and that I must get away from them. She helped me set up a separate bank account, let me use her address for mailing the debit card, and helped me win the RBC student free $100. I also used the school laptops that you can use for free for the day to contact my boyfriend and keep him updated on the situation. With those laptops in the private call booth, I skipped classes to be able to video call with him and catch up. I finished that semester, 20 years old, and immediately went searching for a summer job. That counselor and I agreed that getting my own phone and cell plan would be the best course of action so that they couldn't spy anymore. She said that my relationship was a very healthy one and that I should keep it going. I managed to get hired during my first interview. Actually during the interview process, that was a surprise considering my parents were doubtful I would be able to get a job. When signing up for the job, I indicated that I would be available for full-time and was told I could do so, yet my manager gave me an average of 9 hours a week. I complained several times, yet instead of working in more hours, they kept hiring. After a few paychecks, I started taking out small amounts of cash from my main bank account, the one monitored by my parents, and claimed it was to be used in the food court during breaks whenever they asked, but I was really transferring that money to my hidden account and managed to buy a used phone at the mall along with a cheap cell plan. Doing that allowed for him and I to remain in contact and whisper call at night and message while I was at work. Through the summer, I made it very, very clear to my parents that I was miserable at the in-town university, and to be happy I had to go to the out-of-province university. It took months until they finally gave in. They were finally going to let me go out on my own and be free. It was amazing. I still didn't trust it though. I felt like they were going to change the plans last minute and have me continue at the in-town school like the year before. I hated having to doubt everything. For years, I was living with constant anxiety. My parents actually made me doubt if my desire for human connection was wrong. I hadn't had any true friends for almost a decade, so of course I was going to try and seek any possible opportunity. August again came around and the move happened. My dad and I drove 2 provinces over with my boxes, and I moved into my dorm the next day. During the drive, my dad had a whole talk with me about staying away from people, that I am here for school and nothing else, about not having sex. You'd better not get f***ing pregnant, and all that. Yeah, I am not planning on running around with my legs open, but still, as a 20-year-old I am allowed to make my own choices, and a 54-year-old guy has no business telling a 20-year-old girl what to do sexually. He stayed in town for a couple of days to help me with the shopping needed, and to make sure I got settled in before he went back home. On my first night there alone, I cried in relief and fear. I was so glad to finally have my freedom, but scared that it meant I was stranded alone in a new province that I had never been to before and didn't know anyone in. I FaceTimed my boyfriend, and it was nice to be able to talk freely. He and I talked for hours while I cried. Over the next month, I had a lot of confusing emotions about everything that happened with my parents. Yes, they had financially supported me my whole life, but they had never really been there for me the way most parents would, and if they were, they always used it against me later in well, you should be more grateful because we were such good parents and did X, Y, and Z for you. They constantly flaunt what they have done making my siblings, and I feel guilty for having received what they decided would benefit us. In the end, I have decided that I resent them and will not be able to forgive them. It really, really hurt to make that decision because that meant I had to give up on the possibility of being loved by my parents. Once I moved, I put myself on a diet and exercise routine and managed to drop my weight from 95 kilograms at the time of the move. 108 was my highest, to 81 kilograms, as of today, and I am still losing. This was not possible at home as my parents always intervened. My dad insisted on monitoring if I decided I wanted to exercise, which always threw me off because he criticized everything I tried to do. My mom always messed up healthy eating because almost every meal she made was mostly carbs or takeout. In October, my boyfriend flew in to visit. After being together 1.5 years, it was about time we met in person, and he stayed with me in my dorm for just under a month. Immediately, we clicked right into normalcy. We were immediately comfortable, and it felt like we had been together our whole lives. I knew I wanted to marry him. He made me laugh and smile every day, and I felt like the most beautiful girl in the world every time he looked at me. We celebrated my 21st birthday together, and my parents didn't even call me to wish me a happy birthday. The entire time since moving, they have only called me twice and only messaged me once a week. It is now December, and I am wondering how to proceed with my parents. Unfortunately, I have to go back home. My dorm feels more like home than their house does, over the summer, but luckily next year I will apply for the summer semester too. My boyfriend's father says that I would be stupid to pass up on the opportunity to finish university, especially since I am out of their house. However, when I was stuck living with them and my boyfriend was trying to figure out how to visit, his father said the best way to get me out of there would be to get me pregnant because, what? Are they going to make their grandchild grow up without a father? He and I disagreed on that, but it was an option. If I finish school, it would be by the spring of 2027, so it isn't that long, but with the fear of infertility instilled in my mind by my mom, and the fear of them finding out about my relationship, I really want to leave Canada sooner rather than later to marry and start trying for kids. Either way, I am going to try and move to Sweden to live with my boyfriend, whether it be after this year or when I graduate. In the end, no matter what happens, at some point I am going to end up leaving, and in doing so I am going to have to cut off my parents from my life. I know that they will be furious about having done all of this behind their backs, but from my perspective, they didn't give me a choice with how controlling they have been. I am scared for when that happens because I know it will be very difficult and I don't even know if it is the right decision. I love my boyfriend and I truly do see myself spending the rest of my life with him, but there is still part of me that seeks my parents' approval even after what they have done. TLDR. My parents have mentally, emotionally, and physically abused me. My counselor says that they are severe narcissists. I was repeatedly essayed as a teenager by an adult classmate through blackmail, and my parents blamed me, called me a cheap whore for letting myself be essayed. They refused to let me pursue the case because they didn't want anyone to know that it happened. Years later, I got myself a boyfriend, and my parents spied on our texts and nudes for 8 months before confronting me about it and taking away my phone. I was 19 at the time. Now at 21, I want to move away to be with my boyfriend and leave them behind, but feel guilty because they are my parents and have funded my life and education so far.